Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Lights Out Testing for Lights On Business. I'm Mark Beebe, Marketing Campaign Manager for Worksoft. First, a couple of logistical points. We have a large number of people on the call today, so the lines will be muted, but we will take questions toward the end of this 60-minute broadcast. Please use the question feature to submit questions at any time during the webinar. For questions we can't get to during the Q&A session, we'll be sure to get back to you with an email reply. We will also make a link to the recording of this webinar available for registrants who were unable to make it, or perhaps for colleagues you think might benefit from the material. We're privileged to have Ty Henson with us today. Ty is a senior solution architect with over 25 years of enterprise IT and applications experience. He has served in a variety of development and testing leadership positions, providing him with an acute understanding of the challenges top firms face mitigating risk in complex systems. Ty has worked with Worksoft products for over 9 years and is a well-recognized expert, helping clients realize the benefits of sustainable test automation. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Ty.
All right, thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. So I'm looking forward to today's topic, and let's jump right in. Mark and team came to me and said, you know, with your field experience, we'd like for you to succinctly elaborate on what it truly takes to use automation to mitigate risk. And so I was happy to do that. I have that conversation all of the time in the field, and I was anxious to be able to get into a larger audience and disseminate this information, and we'll even go from there. So let's start with the fact that change is always the event, right? We are testing our systems because things are changing and we need to apply change. And basically, the screen that I'm bringing up now, I apologize for being a little bit of a fear-mongerer, but the fact is that in these situations and many others, effectively, there was change applied, yet there was no testing, or there was ineffective testing that did not catch the problem. But we have to be able to apply change to be adaptive in today's marketplace effectively. And we really cannot afford that change to inadvertently have adverse effects on our business. So what I want to reinforce today and talk about is that we truly have the ability to mitigate this risk using highly effective automation and the ability to execute it. So our overall agenda for today are these topics, and I think that you're here because you either understand the struggle of trying to make automation execution work for you properly to the level that you need, or you anticipate that need. You know, there's a lot of talk in the marketplace around Agile, and even if you're not there yet effectively, you may be hearing that and may be concerned about how will we be able to accomplish that when the time comes. So we actually used a couple of different titles to send out our invite for today. Lights Out Testing for Lights On Business was one, and catchy, and that's the one that we saw just a moment ago. But there was another mailer, at least one other mailer, that said Lights Out Testing, Scheduled and Triggered Testing for DevOps. And I just wanted to reassure you that regardless of the one you received, you're in the right place. Really, what we're going to talk about today applies to both. The fact is that most companies have packaged applications as well as homegrown Agile and DevOps endeavors effectively, and both of these realms can substantially benefit from automation. It really just varies on how and when that automation needs to run. And that's what we're going to break down and talk about quite a bit today. So we'll elaborate for how we can accommodate for both. And we'll touch on these three things, which is what I've brought together for this presentation to truly be successful in this endeavor. We're going to talk about effective automation testing. We're going to talk about creating on-demand automation, and then using the right tool for the execution to really accomplish the task. So there's a story that I will never forget, that of a prospect I was working with in the field, and we were showing him our automated solution, and he said, "Why on earth would I need your automation? I've got 6,000 testers." And I responded with, "Wow, that's very impressive." And before I could even go further, he said, "Yeah, they're my production users." So immediately, you know, that was a scary situation effectively. But he wasn't all wrong in the fact that users are testers. We really, I mean, that's what we need to make sure, is that our users can perform their natural tasks on an ongoing basis, even in the face of change that we need to integrate on a regular basis. So automation can represent those users, but in a pre-production environment. And that's the visual that we're looking at today, is the cost factor for being able to catch those issues before they enter production can be significant effectively. Now, the user interface of our applications has really evolved and has led to very rich and user-friendly applications for doing so. But in many cases, the UI has also taken on functionality that participates in this risk factor that we're talking about. Our multi-tiered applications have many interface points that lend themselves to testing functionality, but unless you include or use the user interface, just like that end user, you've not really fully tested your application. And you know, I keep in mind in this case that I was working with a client, we were using automation to test their e-commerce site. And we caught a problem in the Chrome browser for which the submit button on the order would not fire effectively. Now, fortunately, we caught this in a pre-production environment, but that user was quick to tell me that Chrome represents 25% of their revenue, and had that problem entered the production space, clearly there would have been adverse effects. There would have been lost sales as a result. Well, the bottom line is that was user interface testing that caught that problem, and really no other form of testing would have caught that problem. So I really just wanted to reinforce the importance of that fact. So above and beyond the unit and functional and API testing that we may be doing with our applications, it is vital that we perform the same activities as our users do, and we do that in a pre-production environment. So my objective today really wasn't to break down the modern architecture of our applications, but at least remind us that this UI testing is the most effective way to comprehensively make sure that our systems are working and that our users are able to do their jobs, and that effectively the lights stay on, metaphorically speaking. So testing like a user often means fairly complex scenarios as well. In this particular case, we're showing a true set of cross-platform application or business processes that users perform. In fact, often there's more than one user involved in performing these. And when we talk about true cross-platform end-to-end testing, it's not just within an application, but it spans those applications. And we'll even hit on that a little bit more as we proceed. So as a company, Worksoft continues to innovate, not just in automation, but around the automation space, really, which has driven us to build quick and easy discovery capabilities that allow us to capture end user activity and turn that into documentation and business process models, and most importantly, automation. And so last month, there was a webinar that our product manager did. His name is Chris Kraus, and the name of that was Automation is for Everyone. And you can find that on our website. We would be more than happy to get that back to you, but I thought I had time today to even give a little bit of a demonstration. Chris ran through an example where he used SuccessFactors to act like an end user and build automation. So I thought I would pick something different, and in this case, I'll use an ERP application. But really what I want to drive home here is the fact that we have to test our systems like a user, but it's not difficult to do that with automation. And so what I want to show you today in a quick live demonstration on my demo image is the ability for those end users to participate and provide this value. The value meaning the documentation, the automation, and the business process models. So what I'm doing is basically starting up what we refer to as capture. And without training effectively, because there's quite a bit that we can do here, at a minimum, all the user needs to do is turn it on and turn it off, and we can capture that activity. And I wanted to demonstrate that. So I'm turning this on. I'm going to make sure that it says that it's ready. And then I'm going to go into my ERP system and perform a few functions. Let's do at least 2 so that we can kind of show even what that business process flow looks like. So what I'm going to do here is place a quick order in this system, acting basically like the end users that you know get very good and quick at their job. So I don't want to belabor this too much. I'm going to place this order, but then as promised, I want to do at least 1 additional function. So let's do the outbound delivery for our order. And to accomplish that, I've got to put in a few additional inputs. Okay, and click Save. And you can see that capture is down in the tray, intentionally out of my way, allowing me to do my job. But as a result, when I turn it off now, it's going to effectively capture that activity. Now, for being a member of several of our client sites, I have a few additional prompts here, but the end users typically just get this, which is the success message. So they've turned on capture, they've done their normal job, and they've turned it off. And they can continue to do that throughout their day. In fact, I didn't really say this, but even production users can turn on and off capture around normal work activity, and little do they know that they're actually giving us documentation and automation as a result. So what I'm referring to, I will switch over to now, and that is that in our application, that activity that I just performed as a user now looks like this. We've broken this out at this point functionally, but we've captured every step that the user has performed. And additionally, as a result, we can ask for that in document form. So we can do that as either a PDF or a Word document. In this case, I'm quickly bringing up a PDF, but this represents the visuals and a textual narrative explaining every step that I performed throughout, including full screen captures when we see that change, and tactical object captures for the fields that the user works with. So full documentation, and historically, for somebody to automate something, someone had to write a dissertation much like this with every granular detail involved so that a more technical person could get that automated. In today's world, basically, we simply ask users to turn on and off capture. We collect that. I very quickly want to show you that, I don't want to do training here. There's a lot to talk about, but I'm simply going to turn off my today filter to begin to show more of my activity, just as an example to show that what happens here is we begin to collect these captures that the users perform, and then we can selectively choose what automation we want to use to represent our regression suite. We can even start to apply metrics here and do measurements of how often users are doing these activities, but the bottom line, it's the user that's providing this value, and the end result ends up coming into our solution, and that's what I'm switching to now in step-by-step form. These are the steps that were captured. In this ERP application, I started by putting in the transaction code to get to the right screen. I entered OR into the order type field. I entered 3000 into sales organization. And what I keep referring to is this narrative column to explain exactly what's happening. For those of you that may not know us, we do all of our automation without the need for programming. I'm not going to get into the weeds, but we can also apply different sets of data to run this with, no programming required. We can also add logic to make decisions along the way, like a user might normally need to do, no programming required. And the end result basically is replayable. So let's click on run. I wanted to get one of those views out of my way. My SAP screen, my ERP system, is still sitting there and available. And what I want to do is simply click on run. This will kick in on my demo system here and take control of my ERP screen and continue to run through the same steps that I performed as a user, now in testing form, because basically performing every step is a validation that that action is working within my system, and cumulatively I now have a clear picture of the fact that I can go through that entire process, which in this case was just a simple order, order and outbound delivery, and that it's working effectively. Okay, so this is the foundation that I wanted to set. In fact, there's one additional thing that I want to show you, and let's clean up our environment because this will be relevant to what we talk about as we proceed through our presentation. But basically, in about 90 seconds more, I can show you a cross-platform example that consists of users in automated form, even using multiple applications, right? And that's that more complex picture that we saw just a moment ago. The ability to easily capture end user activity and then use that repetitively on an ongoing basis for testing purposes and do all of the necessary validations and all of the necessary actions to truly act like our users. Now that conversation goes much deeper, and I didn't want to go too deep on automation because our objective is to talk about the use of it effectively. But to do that, I wanted to set this foundation. And in this case, you can see, I'm going to point this out, we generated a random person That'll come up later in our conversation a little bit and in a couple of different ways, but I just want to point that out that in this end-to-end scenario, we generate a fake person so that we can use that fake person in the creation of the opportunity. So what we're witnessing now is the live Salesforce application, creating an opportunity using that fake person. We're going to navigate into the Worksoft account, which is what we're witnessing here. And then Eric Watson, assuming that's the pronunciation, is the fake individual for this purpose. Effectively, this automation has generated some data on its own to use for testing purposes. That's planting the seed for what we will talk about here shortly. But not too much left. This is going to complete adding a product to the opportunity within Salesforce, and then we're going to close out of that application. At this point, we will have hit 2 different websites, and then we're going to launch and log into our ERP system, much like I was capturing against a moment ago. But again, because we're all remote to each other, it's important to mention, you know, what I did was run the automation, and it's the automation that's now in charge of going through all of this. And I've let go of the mouse for the moment. I will pick it back up in a moment when this process is complete. But we take it order through invoice in ERP, and then this one also includes an AS400 screen to do the fulfillment. We take that order number from the ERP system, we log into our AS400 and do the fulfillment of the order, and then back to SAP for a screen capture of the document flow. So quite a bit of activity, cross-platform, no programming, easy to capture from an end user even, and put together in automated form. Now this one is designed with a failure. We definitely want to show you what that looks like, and I'm not going to belabor this, but notice it took me to the first of any failures with a failed message, and the narrative indicates that we're trying to verify our processing status, and the screen capture clearly shows that the processing status is incorrect when in fact we wanted that to be equal to correct, and that's why this one failed. And this is why we're testing. You know, we can run hundreds, if not thousands of these in a lights out testing event or in an on-demand event for Agile and DevOps, and very rapidly know if we have any adverse effects from the changes that we've introduced into the system. Okay, let's close out of this for the moment and get back to our PowerPoint and get back on track. But effectively, the first bullet in our agenda was really laying that foundation, creating effective automation which acts just like our user to do true cross-platform end-to-end scenarios. Okay, but we're still not ready for scheduling just yet. There's one more enabler that is important for us to go over. And so to get there, I want to ask you, you know, when you sit down to do manual testing, what's the first thing you do? Now, most of the users that I work with, I experienced this situation. I sit down, I want to show them capture. I say, hey, can we run through your business process? Let me show you how we can easily capture and automate that. And they say, hang on a second. I need to gather the data that we can use for testing. I need to look that up, or I need to generate some data that allows me to do that. Now, you may be more prepared, but in many cases when I'm working with clients, that happens basically. And what I wanted to come across with in this next topic is the fact that we can use automation not only to save you the effort of doing manual testing, but additionally to save the effort of doing manual test data gathering. Right? And in doing so, what we're truly creating then are scenarios that are self-sufficient and repeatable, basically available on demand for whenever we need to test them. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. You know, in terms of test data concepts, it's much deeper than where I'm going to go today, but at a minimum, many companies, most companies for that matter, will take production data and move it into pre-production environments for testing purposes, okay? And that's very important to see those environments so that we can do effective testing. But on the other side, I'm just representing that simple order, maybe just a little bit more, entering the order, doing the outbound delivery, post-goods issue, and the invoicing. So that we've witnessed can be easily captured. Now, if I begin to schedule that and run, it may run great for a while, but eventually, boom, it blows up, and it's not because my application is broken. It's because the material that I'm ordering is out of inventory, okay? No problem. I go back into my automation and I easily capture the steps to increase the inventory. In fact, making this crystal clear, I don't have to recapture everything. I just capture the net new steps that are needed, and I easily drag them into this process, my automated process, to leverage in this way. But by doing this now, I've created a much more repeatable scenario that I can run ongoing, because my material will always have inventory added for me to then consume from an ordering perspective. Well, that's great until this process that I run in queue gets pointed to dev, because I need to do some low-level testing effectively, and it blows up right away because those materials don't even exist. Okay, so let's enhance the automation one more time. Let's add the steps to find or generate materials, much like we generated that fake person a moment ago in our end-to-end scenario, right? And once we find or generate the materials, and that actually can be both. We can set up the automation easily, the same steps the user would do to say, let's do a material report, and if I find the right materials with the, under the right category, we can latch onto them and use them. But if I don't, we may have to go over to MM01 and start creating some materials for this. And that's all can be built right into my automation. And there's very little additional effort to make that happen. And it's things that we have to do normally anyway for manual testing. It's just that we forget about that when we head for automation, and we don't want to. And in fact, at the end, we might also add some steps that would do some cleanup that would make my overall experience also a much more repeatable scenario. So we want to do less of the data migration on the left and more of the self-sufficient, repeatable automation on the right. And I'm not sitting here saying that it will eliminate the need for data migration, but it will significantly reduce it, which can be important because those are painful experiences for most companies. All right, and with that, we've met the first two bullets. So to summarize very quickly, using effective automation is important, in fact, vital, and making our automation on demand so that we can run it whenever we need it, at any given moment is very important, and we've seen how to do that. We can use those mechanisms to create self-sufficient, repeatable automation. And you can see why those things are important, because if I just schedule automation that is not effective or that is not on demand, I'm going to have failures right away that I'm now dealing with, and I'm not really saving all of the time that I can. So these are really the best practices that enable the ability to mitigate risk with automation execution. Okay, so let's go forward. So now we're ready for on-demand effective automation, so we can just schedule it, right? Not exactly. So if anyone has tried this, you are probably familiar with some of these challenges, basically. First and foremost, we're talking about testing just like a user, which by definition means there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of tests that we have to manage across multiple applications, as we've seen, okay? The tests must be often scheduled in sequence with complex dependencies. It's difficult to manage distributed and diverse testing resources. All of these users that come together to represent true business processes are working on different machines, sometimes in different geographical locations. So central monitoring can be a challenge. The ability to just say, okay, go run my 1,000 tests and let me know when they're done, without the right solution, that's extremely difficult to manage. And the testing time, especially in global situations, is often strictly limited or closely scrutinized effectively. So, in my former life, we had a 2-hour testing window for a global e-commerce site that we always had to fit within, and you want to minimize that downtime so that we can maximize our value effectively. Well, if that were it, that would be great. But the fact is that there's even a little bit more. Automation, acting like a user, needs access, okay? So we have to be able to, those users that are doing testing have to be able to log in. So you need to be able to log in, and you need to be able to do that often on a remote machine. And not only that, but keep it awake for the life of the testing that's happening. You have to be able to orchestrate that workflow. We talked a little bit about multiplayer business processes effectively, and that orchestration can often have some requirements of its own that have to participate in the overall scheduling activity. And then from a global perspective, we need to often get everything done, I mentioned, like in a 2-hour window. And Not only that, but when I say everything, the scale of everything can be industrial scale. You know, we can have many, many tests that need to happen very quickly within these windows. So earlier I talked about our innovations around automation, right? And we took a look at the discovery. We even kind of took a look at the automation itself, the programming-free automation that we provide as a company. But this also includes our experience and our solution to provide that industrial scale execution, eliminating the aforementioned challenges. So the Worksoft Execution Manager, it's a part of our solution, is based on distributable agents that can be distributed very easily to physical or virtual workstations. This includes the ability to work with an RDP server, for example, and even have it log in or create a session for doing testing and then shut that down when in fact the testing is done. And the Execution Manager is also a fully fledged scheduler designed to serve lights out testing using load balancing and definable dependencies. You know, that some of that intelligence that I'm referring to. You know, one example might be, I want to run my smoke testing, and if that succeeds, then I would like to proceed to run my very granular full-on regression testing. That's a very simple example, but those dependencies exist within your scheduling, whether you're doing it manually or whether you need to do it with automation. And on the right-hand side, we are providing interoperability with all of the Agile and DevOps tools. That's why we started to begin to ask those questions. We've got a REST API layer within our solution that not only allows it to be that very powerful scheduler that I was referring to, but allows it to be triggered on demand from the outside world from these tools that we know and love. So, in summary, while also providing that on-demand ability to be driven by Agile, DevOps, and CD tools, it can be scheduled, and this is the picture that we kind of see. In this particular case, you can see we're representing a remote test lab that might consist of virtual machines. You could have an on-premise lab of physical or virtual machines, or a combination of both, and doing very complex scheduling, intelligent scheduling as needed, as well as driving this from our DevOps solutions. So I'd like to give you a glimpse of this that I'm referring to. So I'm going to bounce back over to my demo environment. And to do this, basically, I want to bring up that execution manager that I was referring to. Now, this is a little bit more of a teaser. I've got to admit, this is coming from my demo image, and I'm not prepared in this image for mass parallel execution, even though that's effectively what this product can provide. But I, similar to before, want to at least provide the foundation and give that visual around that foundation that does in fact provide this ability. So let's do just a little bit of introduction, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit between two things, and I'll explain as we go. This is the Execution Manager. It started off on a home page with a dashboard representing the activity. You can see that we've got some lights out testing that we run even on this demo image on a regular basis. But foundationally, what I was referring to is that we define resources. These are those things that can either be physical or virtual resources available to us for doing testing. And in my case, for example, I've got one set up in New York. This happens to be an RDP server that can host up to 5 sessions. And you can see by the visual that we can even see the screen. This is not by any means intended to be real time, but during execution, we take snapshots of what's happening to really make it more clear and to be able to centrally manage what might be happening either in that virtual or distributed realm effectively. So above and beyond the resources, we have requests. And requests are the ability to set up those schedules that I was referring to. So for example, I'll just drill into one. Again, not going too far into the weeds here, but we can not only name and enter categorical information about these requests for managing them, but we could set them up on any recurring schedule, even down to the minute if needed, to run any of the processes that are needed. And those can be in a specified order, or to be able to be run from a load balance perspective in any order. And we can even set the conditions for which these should execute. And that gets into some of that intelligence that I was referring to in terms of building these schedules to accomplish what is needed. Now, what I thought I would do in this brief demonstration is actually bring up, and this is based on the polling, so I'm going to go down this path, Jenkins. So, you know, again, I mentioned that lights out testing for lights on business, but we certainly wanted to include those that are truly focused and working in the Agile and the DevOps and the CI/CD realm, because we have the ability to work with these tools and trigger the execution on demand effectively. So I'm logging into Jenkins that we've set up, and I'm going to go into a particular project. And in this particular example, I'll just click on Build Now to rebuild my application effectively. And down below, you may or may not be familiar with Jenkins, and that's okay. I'm just going to describe that what is kicked in here about midway down on the left is that build. And as a part of it, we have set this up. There's really no prerequisites. I mean, we work with Jenkins out of the box from our solution, but by doing the appropriate configuration and setup, basically, that will now reach out into our execution manager and request that execution. So you can see it's logging in. Now, when I run this one, it's a pretty quick test, so we may not see the visual, but I'll make sure we do see a visual in a moment if we don't get it. Oh, good, there we go. So the Jenkins build is what has invoked the testing that's now happening on my New York resource. And when it's done, the results will be reported back into Jenkins, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. I'll let a couple of the screens paint here before we head back. Okay, so now if I go back over to Jenkins, and the build itself should be wrapping up here in just a second after getting its results back. Well, actually, I want to save us the time. So I'm going to go to the one, within a few seconds, basically, it's going to receive the results back, and they're going to look like this. In the console output, effectively, we latch on to the GUID of that build to make sure that we're tied directly to the right event, but ultimately we're reporting back the status of that testing. So in summary here, what we've just witnessed is through my Jenkins application, I was able to rebuild my application, and as a result, it's set up to automatically kick off the testing from the Worksoft Execution Manager and simply return those results. Even had I not had access to seeing this Execution Manager, that all would have just happened for me, and the results would have been reported back to Jenkins. Additionally, we have the ability to do those schedules, and what I'll do at the moment, let's take a look at just one more running. I'll just click on Run Now, and this happens to be the same end-to-end scenario that I ran a moment ago interactively on my own workstation. So you can see it says that it's running now. And once again, I'll just go back to the resources. Sorry for bouncing around a little bit, but I wanted to kind of just quickly show a few things about the infrastructure and managing this testing very seamlessly, very easily. You know, all of the challenges that we've referred to in terms of being able to log in the machine, being able to keep that machine alive for the breadth of all of the testing, being able to manage those complex schedules. Every challenge that we went through has been solved through our experience in working with our clients. So for some time we've been doing this. In fact, I'll cap off my statements today with a quick example of a couple of trophy examples of some really extreme testing examples effectively. So you may recognize this. This was that fake person generator that we're seeing kicking in there. And I'll give it just a second more, because once we collect that person, you may recall we went into Salesforce. And so similarly, we will witness that coming up on the screen as well. Before I bounce back, I will here is the Salesforce login. So I wanted to let it get to a few of those screens. Okay, so let's get back to our PowerPoint for the moment. So whether you're scheduling at night to maximize bandwidth, and there's really many reasons for lights out testing, whether it's maximizing licensing of the application itself, or the bandwidth, or whatever the reason being, it's often very effective to be able to schedule things to happen while we might be sleeping, so that we can just receive our results when we arrive for our next day. Basically, we can test our entire set of business processes that way. And when we arrive in our morning, you witnessed that failure a moment ago, I might have 999 greens and 1 red, and that's the only one I need to pay attention to, because the greens represent we tested just like a user. We did everything that our users are going to be doing, and everything worked except in this one area, right? And so it really allows us to focus. And then from an interoperability perspective, we've witnessed that we can kick this off on demand as event-based testing exercises effectively. And Certified Execution Manager has the ability to make this very simple. Regardless of the tool that you're using from the outside world, it's now just a call to an established execution manager that has the ability to control resources, do the testing, and return those results. So in this slide, this could be a little bit confusing, but I chose to include this. I thought it was important. Basically, let me explain. In this slide, we have a side-by-side representation of the software development or delivery lifecycle for a homegrown application on the top and a package delivery on the bottom. Okay, and I'm not going to get too granularly into this, but in this case, in case there was any question, I simply wanted to convey that the types of testing represented in green, if that's coming across properly for you, are all perfect candidates for the types of testing and capabilities that we've been discussing today. So you can see that there's a natural overlap in using automation, not only for the DevOps realm for doing great quality end-to-end regression and functional testing, but especially for our packaged application that other vendors are writing but delivering change to us. And I just really wanted to reinforce that today, that we serve both realms quite well, because we often get pegged as, well, when we talk about being really good or the best at testing packaged applications, and that's true, but really no company anymore just has packaged applications. Typically, your company has some DevOps or Agile, and for that matter, some of your packaged applications are going Agile, and that also is going to increase the demand for testing and increase that frequency. So bottom line, our solution truly provides for lights out testing as well as Agile methodology needs. So at the start of our session, I mentioned that change is the event. And with Agile methodologies, much like the previous slide, and this one elaborates a little bit more into kind of the CI/CD realm effectively, but with that Agile methodologies, really what it comes down to is change is more frequent. We're doing iterative sprints effectively depending on our methodology, and with each we need to test. So it's really driving frequency, and for that matter, repetitiveness of testing, and automation really serves that need well. And using this slide one more time, basically even in packaged applications where change may be not as frequent, let's take this one for example. In the lower middle, let's say our SAP application, we do 2 majors per year, but the fact is that our business process now has it linked in with SaaS applications that are being touched at a minimum once per month. And when we're truly doing cross-platform end-to-end testing, that's now driving the frequency of testing even in some of our legacy or older or less frequently changed applications effectively. All right, so now everyone knows what's involved to be successful at mitigating risk through effective, on-demand, scheduled, or triggered automation. And last but not least, we serve both the needs of Agile methodologies as well as packaged application, and we've learned today how to create effective automation, on-demand automation, and use the right tool for the job to make all of it easy to mitigate risk and avoid being in the news like the companies in the beginning. Now, I do want to finalize with just a couple of quick case studies, basically. I'm going to keep this generic, and we'd love to talk more, or as a follow-up as needed, we can get more specific. But let's just say a U.S. federal government program with 10 million participants, and 400 core processes, 500,000 steps being tested nightly. So again, change is being introduced into this realm on a daily basis, and every night they're testing over 500,000 steps of automation, what was historically manual testing, which clearly scales linearly and is not even achievable unless you've got an army of people, which we really don't. So automation is the key to being able to do this successfully. Similarly, there's a global luxury goods manufacturer, and in this case, the measure is in hours, and I like this, over 600 hours of automation running daily, and this happens in a 2 to 3 hour testing window. So you can immediately start to calculate the massive parallel execution capability that is being applied. And bottom line, the solution, the concepts that we discussed today are all providing for these examples. And as I would show more, they all begin to look the same. It's the ability to be industrial scale with your executions, and or even if you're not industrial scale, at least continuous with respect to the frequency and the repetitiveness that we're being driven to in today's marketplace. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Mark, and if there were any questions that came through, we can take some of those, and as you mentioned, we can follow through as needed. We'll make sure to get everyone's questions answered.
Thank you, Ty. Now we'll move on to the portion where we take your questions. As a reminder, you can use the question feature at any time in the GoToWebinar panel to submit your questions to us. Our first question, is Execution Manager a part of Certify, or does it require separate licensing?
It is a line item and is a purchase, but what our sales staff will do typically is work with you as a client to understand what your needs are and package that solution accordingly. But it is a purchasable part of our solution.
Does Certify require programming knowledge? What scripting language does it use?
Oh, that's a great question, because it absolutely does not. I mean, from the beginning, that has been our foundation, and we're basically built on an object action framework that's patented, and it never requires any programming, and it's always very readable so that anyone can truly participate and understand what's happening with the automation.
Our next question, how difficult is it to integrate Jenkins with Execution Manager?
It's not difficult. It's really just a matter of setting up the call for the request of the execution, and then setting up to receive back the results of that execution. And so if you would follow up with us, we can very easily work with you on getting this set up in your environment.
Okay, our next question. We're a current Worksoft customer. Can we get BPP to report back to Jenkins post-execution?
Can we get BPP? So the answer is yes, but it's quite involved. What I'd like to do is have you reach out to us, or we can do a follow-up effectively. But the bottom line, the answer is yes. But the bottom line is that we would simply architect for that. So it is possible to have documentation created, have that attached to the right realms. It's just a matter of architecting for that.
Okay, what is your success rate with web applications, which normally are a pain in areas of automation? So I'm assuming they mean how does the Worksoft platform handle automation of testing for web applications?
Absolutely. Yeah, and great question. I appreciate it, because we are often pegged, and we say it too, we're the best at testing packaged applications, but quite honestly, we do more web testing as a solution than we do packaged applications. And that may sound funny, but the fact is that everyone that has packaged applications has web, and then there's more that we work with that don't even use packaged applications and have only web. In fact, the example that I gave, the first one of over 500,000 testing steps every night, was a web-based application. I'm not sure it said that, but the bottom line is that the expectation should be that if you're set up and configured properly with our solution, capture can be leveraged to truly facilitate the building of that automation, and then you can leverage that on automation in the ways that we've seen to truly eliminate manual efforts for testing purposes.
All right, we've had some great questions come in. As a reminder, you can submit those at any time, and we will ask them to tie. Our next question, is automation scheduled as a background or foreground process?
Oh, that's a good one too. So I do often get that question. Basically, we do work in the foreground, but without ending that sentence, I'm going to say that we do that in a background sort of way. So the foreground is important because we are acting like a user, and again, determining if there's any issues, even as far out in the application as the user interface itself. So we need that foreground tech context, desktop, if you will, the application itself, to be able to take screen captures and act like a user. But when I say we do that in a background sort of way, as you've witnessed from the execution manager perspective, we're often using virtual machines or RDP servers, and even though we are not physically seeing those things sort of in the background, they are processing on our behalf, doing all of that testing.
We've had several questions about HANA and Fiori. Does the Worksoft platform support HANA and Fiori?
Absolutely, and basically the same way that we witnessed today, so that we can use capture against those applications, and then our automation fully supports what will ultimately be for those users cross-platform business processes, whether it's still touching the SAP GUI in the that exists within S4 as well, or if you Fioriized any of your applications, you will be able to bridge across them with single processes in cross-platform ways.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. We've had several questions about Execution Manager and report generation. Can we personalize the reporting, and what type of reporting does Execution Manager provide?
That's a great question. So BPP is another part of our solution that really provides that flexibility of document creation, and it's because it has the ability to take a granular set of results with everything that we collect along the way, and then put that into document form based on templates that you are in control of. So you can truly create documents that are customized for your purpose. You know, everyone starts with their own logo, but even aesthetically controlling the document as well as the level of detail within that document. So that also just participates in our overall solution, where Execution Manager would be used for scheduling, BPP would kick in and allow for that very flexible document creation. You know, I should mention that the top 3 categories, for example, of documentation coming out of this is going to be for just documenting the process in general, or for audit and compliance, that's another very popular one, or for training or onboarding employees. And you can kind of imagine that the level of details that we would include and the way that we would contextually provide that is slightly different for each of those purposes.
Okay, how does capture work for capturing dynamic elements in a website?
So we have configured our product to learn the objects from a website the most appropriate way. And that configuration can be tweaked as needed, but out of the box, we're attempting to do that in the most appropriate way. That's where it starts. So we will capture and learn those objects. It is true that many of the more complex HTML5 offerings coming out today, the developers have a lot of freedom in how they develop these things, and they're doing things in a much more complex way to provide a much richer, more friendly user interface. So bottom line, if they're doing things non-standard to provide that ability, we have the ability to tame that and make sure that it's automation friendly. And that's a configurable layer within our solution that provides that ability. Again, nothing about what we do ever requires programming, but that would be someone doing an initial assessment to configure, and I sometimes refer to it as taming, or making an automation unfriendly site more automation friendly. And the fact is that regardless of the site, regardless of that friendliness, we can always make it friendly.
Okay, why would we need Execution Manager for test scheduling? Why couldn't we use something like Task Scheduler in Windows?
So you can schedule, certify execution from really any scheduler. You just won't have the benefits of overcoming the challenges that we've talked about today. So that's why we package the Execution Manager as a solution meeting all of those challenges, whether it is the ability to work with a remote server, to even log in that remote server, to keep it alive for the appropriate duration effectively, to manage all of this centrally, to manage, all of the challenges that we've talked about. We've basically made that simple in the form of our Execution Manager, along with a couple of proprietary features, which consist of the load balancing. And what I mean by that is I've got 5,000 tests, I've got 5 machines I can run them on. Please go get that done as quickly as possible. And that's what our solution would do, as well as what we often refer to as intelligent scheduling, meaning, again, no programming, but the ability to have the scheduling make decisions and traverse through that schedule based on those decisions, based on the success or failure of other scheduled events.
All right, we have time for one more question. Can I send the results from Execution Manager to my manager or customer?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
All right, again, thank you to Ty and thank you to everyone for attending. If we weren't able to get to your question, we will be in touch with more information. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending you a link to a recording of this webinar. And if you're interested in learning more about Worksoft or Execution Manager, please visit our website. Thank you for your time today. This concludes the webinar. Have a great day.